Welcome to the Battle of the Conferences. Ever wondered which conference can put together the best NFL roster? That's what we're going to find out. We take the best players from every team in each conference, build an NFL roster, and pit those teams against each other in a bracket format. The last conference standing will be crowned champion, which means absolutely nothing. Let the battle begin. This matchup is probably the first one where before I actually go through this, I'm not too sure who the winner is. Of course, I've got a pretty good idea, but it could get close and I don't know who's going to win what. So let's go straight into it here, starting with the quarterbacks, and we start with Big 12. We've got Sam Bradford out of Oklahoma and Andy Dalton out of TCU against the SEC's Matthew Stafford out of Georgia, Cam Newton out of Auburn, Eli Manning out of Ole Miss. And now, there are some quarterbacks, of course, also missing from the SEC. The easy answer I'm going to give there, I based it on seniority. I didn't base the order on seniority, but I based who I included on who was the most senior. Let's just go with that answer, because then we don't have to talk about why maybe other people weren't there. And obviously, we can see even just with these three quarterbacks, the SEC takes the point. So next up, the running backs. And I've got to be honest, I was actually expecting better from the SEC. Let's start with them. We've got Mark Ingram out of Alabama, Derrick Henry out of Alabama, Todd Gurley out of Georgia, and below them there, Jeremy Hill out of LSU, and they're going up against a stack of veterans and some legends here out of the Big 12. Adrian Peterson out of Oklahoma, DeMarco Murray out of Oklahoma as well, then Darren Sproles out of Kansas State, and at the bottom there, Jamal Charles out of Texas as well. And the point there goes to the Big 12, quite obviously, and a strong group they've got there at running back. So this is the first matchup. I think we've started with a point apiece. Let's move on to the fullback position. The SEC coming in strong with Patrick DeMarco out of South Carolina, Jalston Fowler out of Alabama, going up against Aaron Ripkowski out of Oklahoma. A pretty easy point there going to the SEC. Then on to the tight end position, and we'll start with the Big 12. Jermaine Gresham out of Oklahoma, Jace Amaro out of Texas Tech, and James Hanna out of Oklahoma as well. Going up against Jordan Reed out of Florida, Jason Witten out of Tennessee, Martellus Bennett out of Texas A&M. We left some tight ends out as well that we just couldn't fit. Very clear, easy point here for the SEC. So next up, the wide receivers, and let's start with the Big 12. They put a good group out here. Both teams putting very strong groups out. So we start with Des Bryant out of Oklahoma State, Jordy Nelson out of Kansas State, Sterling Shepard, a designated slot player out of Oklahoma. Then as the backups there, we've got Michael Crabtree out of Texas Tech, Tyler Lockett out of Kansas State, and Corey Coleman from Baylor. Strong group, but they're going up against Julio Jones out of Alabama, AJ Green out of Georgia, our designated slot player here, Odell Beckham Jr. out of LSU. Then behind them, we've got Mike Evans out of Texas A&M, Amari Cooper out of Alabama, Alshon Jeffrey out of South Carolina. The Big 12 did what they could, but that is just a ridiculous group of wide receivers to compete against. Another point for the SEC. So as we come on to the final offensive position group, the Big 12 have got a 3-point deficit, 6 points left to get. And in the offensive line, now Big 12 again did well, only one weak position really for them. So left tackle Trent Williams out of Oklahoma, Russell Okung out of Oklahoma State, left guard Kelechi Assembly out of Iowa State, Quinton Spain out of West Virginia, Lane Taylor out of Oklahoma State, a ridiculously strong group there. Cody Whitehair out of Kansas State, then right guard is where they get let down. Trey Hopkins out of Texas, the best they had. Lane Johnson at right tackle out of Oklahoma, Marcus Cannon out of TCU. But as strong as they are, they go up against left tackles of Andrew Whitworth out of LSU, Jason Peters out of Arkansas, Jake Matthews out of Texas A&M. Left guards, Ramon Foster, Tennessee, Chance Warmack, Alabama, Laramie Tunzel, Ole Miss. Centers, Marquise Pouncey, Florida, Ben Jones, Georgia, Mitch Morse, Missouri. Right guards, Gabe Jackson out of Mississippi State, Larry Warford out of Kentucky, Jermaine Ifedi out of Texas A&M, Marcus Gilbert out of Florida, Jawan James out of Tennessee, and Joe Barksdale out of LSU finishing the right tackle group. It's about as stacked as you can find, and that final offensive point goes to the SEC. So that brings us on to the defense. Now Big 12 with a 4-point deficit and 5 points left to get. We start with the defensive line. Big 12, they've got Jerry Hughes out of TCU at one defensive end position, Gerald McCoy in the middle out of Oklahoma, Ataba Rubin out of Iowa State behind him, and then left end is David Irving out of Iowa State as well, and they come up against a full group, Daniil Hunter out of LSU, Sheldon Richardson out of Missouri, and Trey Flowers out of Arkansas, and the right side then in the middle, Geno Atkins out of Georgia, Fletcher Cox out of Mississippi State, and Marcel Darius out of Alabama. And then the left side doesn't get any weaker, Michael Bennett out of Texas A&M, Carlos Dunlap out of Florida, and Charles Johnson out of Georgia. That is just a ridiculous group. I don't think you'll find much better. They take the point. So on to the inside linebackers, and Big 12 puts up Jordan Hicks out of Texas, Derek Johnson out of Texas. I thought why not include Darrell Washington, as he may be back in the NFL next year, out of TCU, and Ben Heaney out of Kansas. And it's not a bad group, but they go up against Dante Hightower out of Alabama, Alec Ogletree out of Georgia, CJ Mosley out of Alabama, and Deion Jones out of LSU. A bunch of options as well that we didn't take. Avery Williamson, Wesley Woodyard, just some of those guys. A clear point there going to the SEC again, and the game there at this point is won. But let's see if the Big 12 can pull any points back. We'll go on to the outside linebackers. Again, it's an outside shot, although they have some nice starters. Brian Arakpo out of Texas, and Bruce Irvin out of West Virginia. Behind them, Lamar Houston out of Texas, and AJ Klein out of Iowa State. However, they come up against a very versatile group. We could go 3-4-4-3 with these guys. Right outside linebackers, Thomas Davis out of Georgia, Jadeveon Clowney out of South Carolina, KJ Wright out of Mississippi State. Left outside linebackers, Justin Houston out of Georgia, Von Miller out of Texas A&M, Marcus Golden out of Missouri. Just a ridiculous group of pass rushers on the left side. Unsurprisingly, point there goes to the SEC. I gotta tell you, I thought Big 12 will be taking some more points. I knew SEC, of course, was a big-time powerhouse and would have a great team, but I thought there'd be some more points going towards Big 12, and they've got a chance here with the cornerbacks. Their group starts with Chris Harris Jr. and Aqib Talib, both out of Kansas, Jason Verrett out of TCU, Terrence Newman out of Kansas State, and then Xavier Howard out of Baylor. Now that could be Pac-Man Jones, I actually somehow completely missed him. And as good as that group is, they then come up against an equally good group of Patrick Peterson out of LSU, Darius Slay out of Mississippi State, Tyrann Mathieu, the nickel expert there out of LSU. Behind them, Casey Hayward out of Vanderbilt and Stephon Gilmore out of South Carolina. And when you look at the two outside corners, Chris Harris and Aqib Talib versus Patrick Peterson, Darius Slay, I can't decide between those two, but then we take a look at the nickel, and say we even included Adam Jones and had him as our starting nickel. Tyrann Mathieu is the gold standard when healthy at that position. And then we look at the backups, Casey Hayward, Stephon Gilmore, both full-time #1 corners behind the aging Terrence Newman and Xavier Howard, or again, someone like Jason Verrett or Adam Jones. The point barely goes to the SEC, but the Big 12 put up as good of a fight as you could have expected. Then the final position group, and it's a strong one on both sides. I would say possibly, maybe even closer than the cornerback. So Big 12, Earl Thomas out of Texas, Tony Jefferson out of Oklahoma, Bradley McDougald out of Kansas. On the strong safety side, Kyle Joseph out of West Virginia, Kenny Vaccaro out of Texas. Coming up against Eric Berry out of Tennessee, Clinton Dix out of Alabama, Reggie Nelson out of Florida, Landon Collins out of Alabama, Keanu Neal out of Florida, Rashad Jones out of Georgia. Starting wise, Earl Thomas probably beats Eric Berry by like an inch, but then Landon Collins probably beats Kyle Joseph by a little bit more than an inch. You look at the depth behind it as well. The point again goes to the SEC. The Big 12 never really stood a chance, but came a lot closer to winning some of these than you might have expected other conferences to. So that is the final matchup of the first rounds. We now have our 4 semi-final teams. But before we do that, we will take a look at the 2 conferences that didn't even make it into this main process, the Mid-America Conference and the Sun Belt, and we'll see why they didn't make it in. So the SEC win go up against the Pac-12. We already knew the ACC would be going up against the Big 10. Now I think there really is a harder time telling who is going to win before the match. I thought it would be here with the Big 12 and SEC. Didn't turn out that way. And I'm interested to see how our first matchup of the ACC versus the Big 10 goes.